Welcome to the Mind Spark, bringing you the latest news from around the world. July 1st, 2025, Canada's national holiday, became the day a crisis erupted. What should have been a day of unity and celebration was suddenly overshadowed by a political earthquake that would shake the very foundation of North American relations. The United States, influenced by former President Donald Trump, announced sweeping tariffs on Canadian lumber, aluminum, and agriculture. These new tariffs hit at the heart of Canada's export economy, targeting industries that had long symbolized the close economic partnership between the two nations. The move shocked the world and signaled a trade war with America's closest ally. Headlines blared across continents, and financial markets trembled as investors braced for the fallout. Trump, from Mar-a-Lago, delivered a televised address claiming Canada had exploited the U.S. for decades. He accused Canadian leaders of unfair trade practices and vowed to put America first at any cost. His words inflamed tensions, making diplomatic solutions nearly impossible. Protests erupted in both countries, and diplomats found themselves at an impasse, unable to find common ground. Ottawa responded with outrage, condemning the tariffs as illegal and vowing retaliation. Canadian leaders called emergency meetings, determined to defend their nation's interests and sovereignty. But Canada's options were limited. Its economy is deeply tied to the U.S. Every day, billions of dollars in goods cross the border, and any disruption threatened jobs, businesses, and livelihoods on both sides. The announcement triggered uncertainty across Canada. Businesses scrambled, families worried, and the historic friendships seemed to fracture. Small towns and big cities alike felt the tremors, as people wondered what the future would hold. This wasn't just another trade dispute, it felt personal, an insult to Canadian identity. For many, it was a blow to national pride and a challenge to the values that had defined the relationship for generations. The world's longest undefended border suddenly felt like a dividing line. Where there had once been trust and openness, there was now suspicion and fear. Trust built over generations was eroding by the hour. Memories of cooperation and shared sacrifice seemed distant, replaced by anxiety and uncertainty. The tariffs set the stage for an unprecedented response. Canadian officials weighed their options, knowing that whatever they chose would have lasting consequences. Canada's answer would target a vital artery of North American geography, the Alaska Highway. This strategic route, essential for trade and travel, suddenly became a focal point in the escalating conflict. The move would escalate the crisis beyond economics. It threatened to disrupt not just trade, but the very fabric of daily life for millions. The border, once a symbol of peace, now marked a new era of confrontation. Security was tightened, and barriers began to rise where none had stood before. The shockwaves reached every corner of both nations. In homes, offices, and public spaces, people anxiously followed every development, aware that history was being rewritten in real time. The world watched as two allies teetered on the brink. Allies, partners, and rivals alike wondered what would come next and whether the rift could ever be healed. The crisis was no longer abstract. It was real, immediate, and deeply personal. Every headline, every alert, brought new waves of anxiety and debate. The next move would define the future of the relationship. Would cooler heads prevail, or would the spiral continue? The Alaska Highway, once a bridge, was about to become a battleground. Its fate would symbolize the broader struggle between cooperation and conflict. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any before. The world held its breath, waiting to see what would unfold at the border on the brink. The impact of the tariffs was both immediate and severe, sending shockwaves through industries across the continent. Almost overnight, the rhythm of commerce was disrupted, and uncertainty took hold. Canadian lumber mills and aluminum plants, once bustling with activity, now faced canceled orders, shrinking profits, and the looming threat of mass layoffs. Workers who had relied on steady paychecks suddenly found themselves in limbo. Prairie farmers watched helplessly as crop values plummeted, their main export market abruptly closed off. Silos filled with unsold grain became a stark symbol of lost opportunity and growing anxiety in rural communities. The pain didn't stop at the border. In the U.S., construction costs soared as materials became scarce, automakers faced costly delays, and supply chains that once ran smoothly began to unravel, threatening thousands of jobs. Ironically, the tariffs meant to protect American jobs now threatened them, as factories slowed production and workers feared for their futures. Stock markets tumbled in both Toronto and New York. Investors panicked, companies froze hiring, and the sense of economic security began to evaporate. The free flow of goods, the very lifeblood of North America's economy, was suddenly choking, with trucks idling at closed borders and shipments stranded. Economists sounded the alarm, warning that if the dispute dragged on, a full-blown recession could be on the horizon, threatening millions of livelihoods. Factory workers, loggers, and truck drivers on both sides of the border faced the grim reality of job loss and mounting uncertainty about their futures. The human cost mounted daily. Families worried over bills, small businesses teetered on the edge, and entire communities braced for the fallout. The crisis was no longer just about policy or trade agreements. It had become a battle for livelihoods, dignity, and hope. Desperation and anger grew, fueling protests and calls for bold, decisive action from leaders on both sides of the border. The economic shock was a wake-up call for both nations, a stark reminder of how deeply their fortunes were intertwined. As government officials scrambled in emergency meetings, the next Canadian move threatened to escalate the crisis to an entirely new level. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of connection, was about to become the flashpoint in a rapidly intensifying economic standoff. As Ottawa hesitated, Alberta's premier seized the moment. Watching her province's energy sector suffer, she announced a bold plan, a toll on the Alaska Highway. The highway, America's only land link to Alaska, would now cost U.S. vehicles dearly. The toll revenue, she claimed, would support Canadian industries hurt by tariffs. The move was direct retaliation, economic leverage for economic pain. Canadians were divided. Some cheered the premier's resolve, others feared dangerous escalation. Ottawa neither endorsed nor condemned the plan, letting the threat hang. For the U.S., the proposal was a provocation. Alaska's access was now at risk. The highway, a symbol of shared history, became a bargaining chip. The dispute shifted from trade to sovereignty and national pride. The world watched as the crisis deepened. The premier had played her card. The U.S. response would shape what came next. The Alaska Highway was no longer just a road, it was the front line. The relationship between neighbors was on the edge. The Alaska Highway is far more than a stretch of pavement. It's a lifeline for Alaska and the Yukon, threading through vast wilderness and connecting isolated communities to the rest of the continent. Nearly all essential goods, food, medicine, fuel, and even mail, travel this route, braving harsh weather and long distances to reach people who depend on them. For remote communities, the highway isn't just a road, it's their economy, their supply chain, and their only reliable connection to the outside world. When a toll proposal surfaced, it sent shockwaves through these towns. Businesses feared bankruptcy, families worried about being cut off, and the sense of security that the highway provided began to crumble. The highway is also a powerful symbol of U.S. Canada partnership, built during wartime on trust, cooperation, and a shared sense of purpose that has endured for generations. Using it as a bargaining chip violated an unwritten pact between neighbors, threatening to unravel decades of peaceful collaboration and mutual respect. For Alaskans, the road is woven into their identity, a link to the outside world, a rite of passage for young drivers, and a symbol of freedom and resilience. The threat of tolls felt like an attack on their freedom, their independence, and their very way of life, sparking outrage and fear across the region. The possibility of closure or severe restriction was more than an inconvenience, it was an existential threat to the survival of entire communities. What was once a symbol of unity and shared achievement now risked becoming a source of division and mistrust between neighbors. The fate of communities, local economies, and even personal identities now hung in the balance, all depending on whether the road would remain open and free. The Alaska Highway was no longer just infrastructure. It had become the very heart of the conflict, a battleground for values and survival. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome would shape the future of the North for years to come. The Alaska Highway was born in World War II, built by the U.S. Army through Canadian wilderness to defend Alaska. It was a feat of engineering and a testament to trust between allies. After the war, the highway became a vital economic corridor and a symbol of partnership. The 1977 Alaska Highway Agreement enshrined free, open access for both nations. The toll proposal now threatened that legacy, contradicting the spirit of the treaty. What was once a bridge of cooperation risked becoming a wedge of division. The highway's history made the current crisis deeply painful, a betrayal of shared sacrifice. Generations had seen the road as proof of what allies could achieve together. Now, it was a reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered. The ghosts of those who built the highway would be stunned by its weaponization. The past and present collided on the road to Alaska. The standoff quickly became hardship for ordinary Alaskans. Supermarket shelves emptied as trucks faced delays and toll threats. Prices soared, and families worried about shortages of essentials. Small businesses teetered, construction halted, Car dealerships stalled, tourism collapsed, layoffs spread, and communities felt the strain. The emotional toll was just as real. Families separated, students stranded, border towns cut off. The sense of a shared northern community was eroding. Towns like Haines and Beaver Creek, once intertwined, now faced existential threats. The crisis was about more than economics. It was about identity and belonging. Ordinary people were caught in the crossfire of a political battle. The human cost of failure was undeniable. The Alaska highway crisis became a battle of national pride. In the U.S., Canada's toll threat was seen as an affront to sovereignty. Calls for a hard line grew. In Canada, the Premier's move tapped into frustration. Many saw it as justified pushback. Neither side wanted to back down. National pride was at stake. Political posturing created a dangerous stalemate. Diplomacy stalled. Outrage grew. The media fueled the conflict, drowning out moderate voices. The trust that had defined the alliance was unraveling. The world's longest undefended border became a public feud. The politics of pride blocked practical solutions. Real people and the North American partnership paid the price. As the crisis dragged on, economic and human costs forced a search for resolution. Business leaders lobbied for sanity, warning of irreversible damage. Quiet diplomacy resumed. Both sides needed a way out without losing face. The solution required the U.S. to ease tariffs and Canada to drop the toll threat. The crisis was a painful reminder of deep interdependence. The Alaska Highway symbolized this mutual reliance. Both nations had far more to lose than to gain from conflict. Trust would take years to rebuild, but tentative steps offered hope. The goal, not just to end the crisis, but to restore the partnership. The Alaska Highway's future would reflect the fate of two great allies.